Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to join us here, KLT, shortly before Easter. So we really appreciate that you've come. My name is Nick Westcott. I'm the director of the Royal African Society, as you can see, who have helped organize this. We work in close partnership with the International African Institute, IAI, in producing the African Arguments book series, of which this is the most recent publication. It has a long and distinguished line of succession. I think copies are available.
Yes.
So don't miss it. And the author will be very happy to not only talk about it, but sign it afterwards. The African Arguments series is designed to pick out particular areas that are often neglected. And I think the bushmeat trade is a classic example of a major phenomenon that has been either talked about in rumor and misinformation or just completely neglected. I will be honest with you that I'm not an expert in this subject. To my knowledge, I've never eaten bushmeat, except once, when I discovered that I had been eating zebra, apparently. So in memory, I wear a tie with zebras on. But this is only one of the many things the Royal African Society do. We have a whole series of events. You can find all these details on our website. We will next be having a rather interesting talk from the current British Minister for Africa and Development, Andrew Mitchell, here in SOAS on the 24th of April, to tell us what Britain's policy towards Africa is nowadays, as it's not always been clear. So that will be quite an interesting event. We look forward to it. But in the meantime, I don't want to hold up this one. We're delighted to have Dr. Jack Jenkins, who is en route from Swansea to Durham, where he is based in the Department of Anthropology, and is working on a project, Alive Africa, Animals, Livelihoods and Well-Being in Africa, funded by the European Research Council. Excellent. Good. Still some European money coming in. And has focused his work particularly on Sierra Leone. And thank you very much, Jack, for coming. And of course, the author, but I will leave you to introduce the author and look forward to this event. Thank you very much, Jack.
Thank you. You want to start now?
No, when I do start, straight. Yeah. So yes. No.
Okay.
Thank you, Jack.
Well, evening, everybody. I'm very pleased to introduce Theodore Trefon this evening to be able to discuss his new book with you. Theodore is a senior researcher and the head of the contemporary history section of the Royal Museum for Central Africa, just outside Brussels in Belgium. And he also is a lecturer at the University of Kinshasa. He had a PhD in African politics from Boston University, which I think explains the accent a little bit.
Yes, indeed.
And devoted his career to study in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. He focuses on issues of state-society relations, forest-city links, urban anthropology, and environmental governance. And he's also a research coordinator for the Forest City Interface dimension of APFT. Now, when you read the book, as I hope you all will, it will take you through a really engaging and innovative description of the history of wildlife management in Central Africa. It brings out the challenges that have only grown over time despite efforts to slow down the damage being done to the region's wildlife. And I think it's a tremendously timely book. I don't think we've ever had as much awareness of or interest in environmental issues as we have today, whether that's about climate change, deforestation, pollution, or indeed wildlife loss. And it's a book that would be of interest to experts working in any number of related fields. But I should say that it's not just a book written for experts. It's an accessible introduction to the issue, and I'm sure it will be of great interest to many people who would like to understand why hunting and the trade of Central Africa's wildlife has intensified and the challenges that lay ahead. Now, I share research interests with Theodore, but I have a different contextual focus centered on West Africa. But despite the different context, and having never worked in Central Africa personally, by the end of the book, I felt much closer to the local context and felt that I better understood how the bushmeat trade works in that region. And I think this is in no small part due to the ethnographic approach that Theodore takes in the book. He engages with the literature, he explains the issues, and then at key points he brings in ethnographic material to bring forth the needs and the values of local people. And these are perhaps the people who matter most in this story. They live closest to the animals, they're involved in the bushmeat trade, and they consume their meat. And I think the way that it gives local communities a voice and tells the story from their perspective is a great value of the book. And I'm sure this will come out in Theodore's presentation. Now, to just give a brief outline of how we plan to go about this this evening, sorry. Theodore will give us a presentation of his book. After that, we'll have a Q&A session where we'll be joined by Philip Maruthi, who is Vice President of the Species Conservation and Science in Nairobi. He's also worked with the African Wildlife Foundation for over 20 years and represents the AWF in the International Conservation Dialogue. But at the same time, during that Q&A, you'll all be welcome to ask questions. I should say that I'll ask questions in groups of 3, and I'll ask you to give your name and affiliation while we do so. I'll ask you also to keep your phones on silent if you haven't put them on already. And I should say that this meeting is recorded and will be available on live stream. So now I'll invite Theodore to present.
Thank you very much, Jack. Thanks.
Sorry, can I say something? Someone who's online said that there is no sound in the Zoom.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for that. So in the meantime, I'd like to thank all of you for coming. Thank you, Jack. Thank you, Nick. Thank you, Stephanie. Stephanie deserves the big round of applause. Thank you very much. Without Stephanie, this book wouldn't exist. I'll also point to the presence of some of my colleagues from the Wildlife Conservation Society who've been very, very helpful. Juliet Wright, Eric Nana, Diva Malekani. Thank you for coming as well.
Okay.
That's good?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I need to double check.
No.
You can use this one.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, so again, so thanks to everyone, Africa Museum, WCS, Erhaif in Kinshasa, and the Trade Hub, which is part of the research project funded by the US government. This is an image that you'll see in many places in Central Africa, people selling smoked bushmeat, cane rats, reptiles, antelope, wild boar. Bushmeat is all over the places. You're going to see a number of photos here. So what are the main takeaway messages of this book? There are 3 of them. First is that bushmeat is culturally and economically important throughout Central Africa. Wildlife is under severe pressure, and management strategies are largely inefficient for the time being. While there are hundreds of scholarly articles about bushmeat, wild meat, conservation strategies, there's not a single volume that has addressed the subject in a holistic way. And so that I do think is real value added to have this in one book. And probably it has something to do with the fact that I'm not a bushmeat specialist. I was able to look at other disciplines, which is why I was able to take a broad view. Because a bushmeat specialist would focus on either monitoring, smart technology, or species depletion, or links between zoonotic diseases in certain species. So many researchers working on wildlife have a vertical approach, and I've tried to take a horizontal approach, which is why that we've been able to do this book. So in the Bantu-speaking world, nyama is the same word for both animal and meat, and I'm going to come back to this at the very end. I have a few quotes because, as Jacques said, one of the things that he liked in the book was there's a lot of ethnographic data. I spent lots of time talking to people in French, in Lingala, and just being friendly with people and getting people to talk. So I've had hundreds upon hundreds of formal and informal conversations. And I like this one here. Yes, meat is my alpha and omega. God, family, and bushmeat. Those are the things that really matter to me. More scenes of bushmeat. Some of the different aspects that African studies in general will find interesting here is that the book looks at food security, it looks at institutional frameworks and governance, wildlife crime, forest ecology, deforestation, biodiversity, urbanization, which is a big pull for the urban bushmeat trade, demography in the youth bulge. So the book is Central Africa, but the forest in the DRC is 60% of all of the forest in the Congo Basin. So it's really the DRC that matters. And we have a tremendous demographic growth. It's 3.2%. And I think half of the population is between 16 and 17, and less than 16 or 17 years old. So it's a very rapidly growing population. And this has a severe impact on wildlife conservation. Political economy, public health, gender relations, and cultural identity and benefits. So when you look at all of these things, in the Marcel Mauss approach about a total social fact, bushmeat is a total social fact in Central Africa. So as I say, I've talked to lots of people, traders, bushmeat sellers, hunters, park rangers. So I've had a lot of conversations with people. In terms of volume, we estimate that between 5 and 6 million tons of bushmeat are consumed annually. That's about half of the production of beef produced annually in Brazil. So, we're talking about a lot of meat. It's not only in Central Africa. You often see these coolers on the belt in airports coming from African airports. And there's a lot of studies in Paris, Charles de Gaulle, and in Brussels that have documented how many hundreds of tons that come in every single year into Europe, because the diaspora population is very much attached to eating bushmeat. So some of the main arguments: urban consumption of bushmeat has increasingly devastating effects on the fragile web of biodiversity, local economies, community well-being, and health. That's already, quite a statement when you think of how bushmeat consumption has a very severe impact on these issues. Hunting is a persistent phenomenon driven by rapid urban population growth, cultural attachment, and economic opportunities. Thing about culture and economy, it's unavoidable when you're looking at these issues. Many people in Africa say, well, we eat it because it's traditional. It's food that was raised in the forest. These animals ran through the forest. So, these are things that you can't get by domesticating animals, even though there's other strategies to do so. But the fact that it's wild is a big cultural attachment. So despite efforts, the forests are being emptied. And there's a lot of work by conservation biologists that are indicating lots of areas of wildlife depletion and areas where there practically is no more wildlife. I'm not going to go into the specific chapters, but I'll just give the titles of the chapters. So the first one is Meat for Some, Wildlife for Others. And so this really points to the ideological debate. In Central Africa, people say, no, it's meat. Whereas for people working from the conservation angle, they say, no, it's wildlife. So there's a discussion on that dichotomy. There are two background chapters. The first background chapter is about the shrinking forest habitat, because obviously without forests, you're not going to have wildlife. And there's very significant deforestation throughout the Congo Basin. We're familiar with the equivalent of so many pitches of forest, of football pitches being devastated every minute. So there's a link. If we don't have forests, we're not going to have wildlife. And that's also a dialectical relationship, because without a healthy wildlife population, you're not going to have healthy forests. So that's the first background chapter. Now, these are common images that we see: dwarf crocodiles. Slash and burn farming is the main driver of deforestation. When you have a population of 100 million people in the DRC, people that live basically by slash and burn agriculture, satellite imagery really documents the degree of deforestation. But forests are essential to local populations for livelihood. So you can imagine what's going to happen to these people when there are no forests, and when the forests are degraded, when they can't find access to their resources. And this brings in another issue, which is the push to create more protected areas, because this also drives people out of their forests and restricts what they can do, what they've traditionally done: hunting and fishing and harvesting of non-timber forest products. We also looked at this thing about state versus traditional authority. So the legitimacy and legality dichotomy. The state says the forests belong to us, but customary authorities do not look at the state in the same way. So whose resources are we talking about? So those are some of the issues that I've done in the second background chapter. Third chapter is a historic analysis of conservation efforts in Africa, because again, this whole thing about pushing for more conservation, that requires tremendous management skills. It also requires tremendous governance sensibility, and that we don't really have. And so this is something that is, it's an ongoing challenge, is how to manage protected areas. I'm not going to discuss this one. Are there any Congolese here? Probably don't know what this is. What's this statue? Huh? It's the MPA, no? It's the statue that was common in every village at the time of the Mobutu dictatorship. And so here we have Africa Wildlife Foundation, which has taken over the statue representing the state. And so this is something that I think is quite amusing, how NGOs are replacing the state in all of these issues. Perceptions of wildlife conservation. I'm not going to go into this now. You'd have that in the book. There's a chapter on hunting and transition. So the kind of the whole history of hunting. I like this quote here. I took with hunters that I met in the DRC. Hunters with their shotguns and their dogs with bells around the neck so they could follow them when they're chasing game. Going into the forest without my shotgun would be like going to church without a Bible. No. Yeah.
Sorry. Just trying to
Thank you.
remove this. It's not coming.
Oh, you can see that. Cable snares. There's a link between industrial logging and wildlife hunting, because here you see that those are heavy cables that are used to link logs floating down the Congo River. They're tied together with these cables, but people steal these cables and they unravel the strands and use those little cables as snares. So the snare is a big issue, because traditionally snares were made from liana and vines. And the thing with the increase in snares, there's less attention to species. And so, for example, where a hunter may not have traditionally shot a bonobo, a snare doesn't know the difference between a bonobo and another monkey. So these metallic snares are quite a problem. Natasha. I think when you, sorry.
No, it's okay. Okay.
Yeah, okay. We also have a chapter on the culture of consumption, which responds to the question, why eat it? And again, this is really an ethnographic chapter based on lots of interviews with people. Tradition, taste, and availability, cost, and lack of alternative proteins are some of the intertwining reasons that people give about why they eat it. And others just simply say we eat it because we love it. And so that's a hard nut to crack when you say we eat it because we love it and you're trying to institute behavior change campaigns. That's something that has to be factored in. Another quote from someone that I thought was quite amusing: "Stewed monkey and my mother's bosom go together." Well, someone that grew up eating bushmeat and he loved it. Huh? Symbolic importance, I won't go into that. Just one point that I think is quite interesting here. Any Bible readers here? You know, the Corinthians said, eat whatever is sold in the meat market without raising any question on the grounds of conscience. No, the Bible is the most widely read book in the Congo. And so people know about this passage. What does that mean? That everything that was taboo for women and children before, now women can say, no, the Bible says we can eat it. So we're going to, so that you automatically double the population that's eating bushmeat. This is something that's obviously photoshopped, but it's circulated at the time of New Year's. Now, in other words, Bonne Fête, Happy New Year. You can't have a Happy New Year if you don't have a lot of meat. Again, the importance of perceptions here. Bushmeat economy, that's chapter 6. You know, and this is something that from a conservation perspective it's a missing link, because there are very few economists actually working in wildlife conservation, not enough. And so like the whole value chain question is something that is understudied. So I've tried to piece together available literature and my own interviews about the economy. So just who are the actors involved in the bushmeat economy? So you obviously have subsistence and commercial hunters, you have village traders, transporters, wholesalers and retailers, restaurant owners, the upscale and the informal restaurants, brokers and invisible actors. And again, all this converges into the value chain actors, and there's a lot of people involved, which means that thwarting the bushmeat trade is a really big challenge because there are so many people involved. And probably the most interesting element here is the new technology in bushmeat trade, the invisible actors. Before, bushmeat was sold exclusively in markets or people transporting bushmeat from point A to point B with a specific destination in mind. Whereas now, thanks to mobile phones, mobile banking on phones, people can call someone and say, I want so many carcasses of monkey or of antelope or any other species. And so these invisible traders have really come to become a big part of the trade. And when there was the closure of the Wuhan market in China, there was a tremendous upsurge in wild meat on the internet. And so these are the things that will also point to the importance of the economy of the bushmeat trade. This is a photo that I already discussed with Jack, because you see, it's an old photo. It was taken in 2010. And there's an indicator here of how old the photo is. Does anyone see anything that seems out of place today? Did anyone come here by bicycle by any chance? What you will not see today is a bicycle at a bushmeat trading place like that, because what's happened now, it's the motorbike. The motorbike has totally has eliminated the use of bicycles. So what this means is that the link between forest and intermediary market or main road has been significantly reduced in time and effort. You know, these cheap motorbikes are maybe $1,000. People can afford to do them because they pay for themselves in a short time. So compared to the bike, that's the motorcycle is really an important factor in the bushmeat trade. Eating out in Kinshasa, this is a real ethnographic chapter where we worked with one woman who has a bushmeat restaurant, and her story, I think, it's tragic and enlightening at the same time, because it's really a woman that tells her life story about selling bushmeat in a restaurant. It's one of the chapters that I really enjoyed the most. And when I asked the question about, well, what do you think about the problem of wildlife disappearing? And she responded, well, I'm a businesswoman and bushmeat is my livelihood. Everyone has the right to earn a living, no? So it's hard to argue with people like that. So obviously a chapter on bushmeat and zoonotic diseases. Not going to go into that. So what I wanted to do, instead of going into the scientific debate about zoonotic diseases, is mainly to look at the social and cultural dynamics connecting people, wildlife, and disease, because there was a lot of reluctance to even believe that there was links between coronavirus and bushmeat or other zoonotic diseases. So people tend not to believe it. And other people have said, well, what are we going to do? Go hungry or take the risk of catching a zoonotic disease? So they'd prefer take that risk opposed to going hungry. Final chapter is on policy, legislation, and enforcement. And this analyzes the legality-legitimacy dichotomy. And here the main message here is that laws that are not socially relevant are very difficult to enforce. And there's a lot of hypocrisy amongst law enforcement officers and authorities because they're big bush consumers themselves. Oh, I have plenty of anecdotes in that chapter that I don't have time to point out now, but that's something that is clearly identified in that book. Okay, I'm not going to go here. So the conclusion here is exacerbated by factors that lie well beyond the intervention capacity of national governments and the international partners, such as poverty, demographic growth, urbanization. The survival of wildlife in Central Africa does not look promising. Well, I mentioned nyama earlier. It's the word for both meat and animal. So you probably didn't know that before, but Homer Simpson did know it. Huh? If God didn't want us to eat animals, why did he make them out of meat? The restaurant menu from Kisangani, where you have antelope, wild boar, porcupine, and we've come to the end. Bon appetit. Thank you very much.
Take a seat?
Yeah.
Okay.
Was time okay? How many minutes was that?
Okay. 25. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone. So we're not a big crowd. We can, well, I suggest that Jack invites you to have a conversation about these issues.
Yeah. Okay. May I ask one just before we
Yes, sir.
to the crowd? It was mostly about the ethnographic approach, and when I was reading it, when I was thinking about my own experience of trying to do research with people who are doing something either on the fringes of illegality or something which is illegal, for example, hunting with a gun without a permit, hunting certain primates, selling or buying bullets or locally made guns, is that it takes a long while, well, sometimes can take a long while for people to open up and be willing to speak to you about what they're up to. Do you find that this approach which you used to research, this ethnographic approach, it helped you for people to open up to you?
I honestly had very, very little reluctance of people to speak openly about their work. And so I can have a conversation in Lingala, which is the main language spoken in the areas that I worked in, the two Congos. And I think it's important, first of all, to explain what you're doing and to establish some kind of relationship of trust. And I didn't go in with a recorder, a camera, a notebook. No, I just had conversations with people. And then for the note taking, that would happen very shortly afterwards. Because people, certainly the Congolese, do not like having their voice recorded. That completely changes the discourse. And I found that being friendly and joking with people, asking about the family and stuff like that, you just break the ice. And really, people did not have issues with me. And that was along the whole scope. It was the hunters, the market women, and surprisingly, the authorities that I was able to speak with also spoke very, very openly. I had, one anecdote that's in the book. It's that I was at a meeting with the head of the Congolese Institute for the Conservation of Nature. And he said to me, well, I'm going to have to leave because I have an important guest coming for dinner. So half jokingly, I asked him, I said, well, is bushmeat going to be on the menu? And he said to me, well, I'm not proud of it, but I owe this man respect. Yes, and I'll be serving wild boar with red wine. And so, that's just the type of openness that, so you think that because he's the head of the Institute for Wildlife Conservation, that he's, oh, no, never, we'll never do that. Or he wouldn't say it openly, but, that's just an example. People do speak openly about it. It's also because they love it. Now, if I had gone in with the T-shirt from an environmental NGO, that probably would have changed the approach. But I didn't do that.
Definitely. I had somebody say something to me that they were looking forward to getting back to the provinces to eat some monkey, and they were in a similar position. So, yeah, when you get the openness, it's great. But now we're keen to get as many. Yeah, we're keen to speak to Dr. Philip before we go to a Q&A, but we are keen to get as many people asking their questions as possible. If we can just ask Dr. Philip if he has any comments or questions for Theodore.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you very much, Theodore, for your presentation. And I haven't read the book, I should own up. Therefore, I'll only make a few general comments. I think this is very central to conservation in Africa. You have highlighted the issue in Central Africa, but I can tell you that this is the issue of bushmeat is everywhere. We have legal and illegal consumption going on, and it is in the savannas, it's in the forests. But the way you've expressed it, I like that. I like that you have approached it from a very people-centric approach, because that is eventually going to be the crux of the matter. People are central to conservation, and how can we, from what you're learning and what we learn, how can we make sure that people understand that wildlife is both food, it can be, but only if it is done in a sustainable manner. And how can we combine the issues that you raise and look at sustainability of wildlife conservation? Because as you said, without wildlife, then we are facing many problems, some of them ecological, cultural, and so I think this is important, and lessons should be pulled out of it, addressing some of the gaps that you found into the work that we are doing with the conservationists and the other non-conservation players are going to be important in resolving this question. So the Ministry of Agriculture, Planning, Finance, all those people need to come together so that this can be addressed more holistically. Let me just stop there and give people a chance to ask any questions. But yeah, well done for and a good presentation. I'm sure this issue is not over.
The issue is not over. I think that's a good way of summarizing the problem.
Great. So we'd love to open up to some questions. If you could make yourselves known, if you'd like to ask one by just raising your hand. Okay, I'll go in groups of 3. So if we go left to right here, here, and then here, if you'd like to get the microphone.
You want me to introduce?
Oh yeah, if you could say name and affiliation, that would be great.
My name is Simon Hoyt. I'm in anthropology at UCL.
Great.
I work in Cameroon, and I see some of my colleagues over there. Yeah, and in the area that I've worked in, which is in the forest, southern Cameroon, I've sort of watched as NGOs come and go through villages and carry out various projects, which in general are very top down. You know, they don't consult people. They have an idea in an office in London or in New York, and then they try and implement it on the ground. And some of those in relation to bushmeat that I've seen are what they call income generating activities or alternative livelihoods, where they, for example, bring in chickens to hunter-gatherer villages or to farming villages and say, you should start eating chickens now because we need to save the animals, the wild animals. But of course, I haven't seen any instance where this has actually worked. And it's just, I find these approaches quite sort of naive because they don't recognize the sort of values that you've talked about, the strong cultural values, but also many of the people that I work with, for example, they regard domesticated meat as dirty. It's something dirty they don't want to eat. They eat around in the rubbish pits around humans. You know, they want to eat the real meat, which is in the forest, which I'm sure you've heard in your interviews many times. So I'm just interested in what you think about these sorts of alternative livelihood projects by NGOs and whether you think they could work or not.
Thank you. Nick Westcott again. My main experience was in Ghana, where consumption of bushmeat has fallen a great deal because there is none left. And then people do find alternatives. But again, like the forest, which was all logged, the bushmeat was all eaten. And it's very hard to stop that process, as you say. People will consume until there is nothing left to consume. And the only argument that began to work, when that's at a very late stage, was there will be no bushmeat left unless you conserve some. So for the sake of preservation, you have to allow a place where it can continue to reproduce. But that is very hard if you don't actually have much control over a lot of the forest belt. And it'd be good to have your view on whether the preservation of some, at least, islands of wilderness is feasible, or whether poachers will always break in and continue to consume until it's gone. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Thibault from Pangea Risk. I had a question. During your speech, you didn't mention the word poaching once, which is generally quite used by in the conservation narrative. Is there any particular reason for that?
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that question. So I'll respond to the question about alternative livelihoods, and I don't think they exist. I think that what they are complementary activities. So I didn't have, I had a lengthy presentation. I didn't have time to go into everything, but here, there are two examples here. Is this woman was a former bushmeat trader, and she was given the opportunity to take sewing lessons so she could develop another skill. She stopped selling bushmeat. But what did she do? She put her niece at the table that she used to have at the market. And so, people are very creative when it comes to maintaining their, a source of revenue is not something that you're going to walk away from. So an alternative activity becomes a complementary activity. The other thing, this one here, do you know what these things are on the right-hand side? They're beehives. So, you know, you're gonna set up a honey producing community amongst indigenous peoples. As you said, these projects fail. This is the perfect example. Those beehives, no one ever wanted them. So I fully agree with what your observation is, that no, alternative strategies do not tend to work very well. We also have someone that did her PhD studying these things who came to the same conclusion. Second question.
And conservation work.
That's a big dilemma. I have two elements of a response there. The first is that protected areas serve an important role in biodiversity conservation. But managing these in a socially acceptable way is something that has escaped park managers. And I know that some of the examples that I have, when you look at the budgets for these protected areas now, approximately 50% is community development. But community development strategies do not work well. And so we're also going to be encountering severe human rights violations as we increase protected areas. You know, what are the rights of these people? That's the first thing that I'd mentioned. The second thing is that in one area where I've been going for many years, where there is bushmeat depletion, and the one researcher found that local communities that formerly did not eat caterpillars were now consuming caterpillars, and other people that were hunting cannot earn a livelihood by hunting. So what were they doing? They were making charcoal. You know, the charcoal production is a big issue in this area as well. But it's going to be the same thing. As you chop down the trees to make charcoal, you're going to have forest degradation, and then you're not going to have the caterpillars from those trees. And so the thing is there that what you do have is production of chicken and pork, but it's still not competitive. It's cheaper to buy an imported box of frozen chicken legs from Brazil or Germany, with all of the disruption in the cold and the freezing, the cold chain, where they have public health issues there. So the quality of food consumption has gone down. There was one area where I was talking to one man who said, if I can hunt a cane rat, I can sell that cane rat for enough money to be able for me to buy frozen chicken, oil, and rice. I can feed my family for a week with that. Whereas if we ate the cane rat, there would be one meal. And what do you eat it with? So you have the substitution of poor quality food instead of eating quality food. And so that's a public health issue as well, food security.
No poaching.
Poaching. I deliberately did not use the term poaching because you did see that I was focusing on the question of legality and legitimacy. And I'll give one anecdote about someone that told me that I was arrested for hunting in my forest. My grandfather hunted there. My father hunted there. This area became a protected area in 2013. So by the stroke of a pen, me, a respected hunter, became a poacher. So does he consider himself to be a poacher? It's the legal frameworks which have defined him as a poacher. That's not his identity. No. Does that respond to your question? Oh, yeah.
No, it's just about your perspective.
Yeah, good. Thanks.
Okay. One here. One here. Anybody else?
Yeah.
Hi, hello, my name is Janet. I am a lecturer at University of East London and I'm from Guinea-Bissau. My question is, did you speak with the village head to understand the history or tradition? What ethnicities use bushmeat, how they use it, why they use it? And also, did you thought about, there are some people who actually just see this as an opportunity for them to eat, because they normally use bushmeat, at least in my tradition, during ceremonies to celebrate something.
Yes.
And did you had a look at that aspect? And there is a couple of things that I disagree. So when you say that, when you show us the slide of the culture of consumption, so did you mention that someone said that we eat because we love it, but it's not really like that. And how did you base your research on, on just what he said? And into the religion and belief system as well. So I also disagree with it being a religious, because we don't believe in God. So therefore, this is now how we start to eat bushmeat. So I just think that there's a couple of things, there's a couple of gaps over there that I would like to know if you could just, because I have not read the book, perhaps I'm making a misjudgment, but if you can explain to me a little bit more on how did you base your research? Sorry.
Okay, hello, I'm Eric Nana, work with University of Oxford. I'm a conservation biologist. I come from Cameroon. So thank you for this book. I mean, it sheds a lot of light on the bushmeat issue, which many people actually tend to overlook. So my question is about alternative proteins. You didn't talk much about it in your book. It's similar to alternative livelihoods, but it's for consumers. So I also think that today, like most international organizations, interventions, like trying to reduce the demand, especially urban demand for bushmeat, and promoting alternative proteins like chicken, pork. Don't you believe these are not truly alternatives, because the people who eat bushmeat already eat this species. So if we tell them to eat this to replace bushmeat, actually, this cannot replace bushmeat, because if people eat bushmeat for the taste, if they eat it culturally, then chicken or pork or beef will never replace that. Then the second question is, what suggestion do you have? How can I solve the bushmeat crisis when the policy and decision makers and even law enforcement officers were supposed to help fight the situation are the primary consumers of bushmeat, and they even prefer to eat the very threatened species? So how do you fight a system when the people were supposed to, how to fight a crime when people are supposed to fight that crime are the very ones promoting it on the ground? Thank you.
Hi, thank you for that. My name is Shira. I'm interested in great apes, and I was wondering whether you encountered, whether stories or firsthand, great ape, namely gorilla consumption in the DRC for ceremonial or medicinal purposes.
Okay, first question about how I went about doing the research and what people said it was. So as I said, there were hundreds of conversations, and I did not try to structure this according to ethnicity. So that what we have encountered in Central Africa is that people that come from the forest, the central basin, people where there is an abundance of bushmeat, this is deeply ingrained in their consumption patterns. And it also has to do with the fact that there are very little alternatives. So people eat what's available. They fish during when they live near rivers, and they hunt when They've been able to do so in a traditional way, in a sustainable way, respecting things about not hunting females, not hunting young animals, focusing on the older males. So there was a lot of tradition involved that people did emphasize. But in terms of ethnicity, I didn't ask people what their ethnic affiliation was. It was more from a geographic region question. But the other issue there is that when people move to the cities, and Central Africa is about 50% urban, 50% rural now. People eat what's available. And while people that came from the forest, that migrated from the forest into the cities, they claim to be very attached to this meat. And not necessarily for ceremonial purposes, but for purposes of a family meal. If someone that they want to show respect, then they're going to serve them bushmeat. But in terms of ceremonies, I didn't really have much information about that. There were some things, and I have that in the table here about this table that was very long that I didn't want to go into, because the symbolic importance of wild animals. For example, a number of people told me that when my mother gave me my first bath, there were bones of chimpanzees in that bath water, because that would give me strength and resilience. And so one person said to me, when a chimpanzee falls from a tree, does it break a leg? No. And so that these types of symbolic things are very, very deeply ingrained. So people know these, even though in the urban environment, these things people know about them, but they tend not to respect them anymore. Did I answer most of what you said? Oh, the religious question as well.
I am Patel, that's my name. So if you say someone that's my jackal, because from my side they eat ape and dog. But if you say someone that's my jackal, you'll find that stuff in. So it's not, that's why I said be a little bit careful, because you are eating something that happens within the country, but as you know, that West Africa to be outlined the activities, so therefore we have our own and that has a huge and impact on someone who might be from a different point to hear. So I understand it's not your background, but just
I know where you're coming from there. And some of you may have seen on BBC News 2 days ago that there was an increase in the consumption of bear meat in Japan. And, there's issues like Norwegians eat whale. There was consumption of Galapagos tortoises. People eat things that from one society to another may seem unsettling. So I didn't, I pointed out these issues, but what my main objective was to emphasize that bushmeat consumption is something that you find throughout much of the society. What was the second question about alternative livelihoods? But it wasn't a question. You made the observation.
Alternative proteins.
Alternative proteins. No. Okay.
Can they replace bushmeat?
No. They're not going to replace bushmeat until bushmeat disappears. People are going to be resilient. They're going to start. Well, just take the example of Kinshasa, where before it was very common for street food to eat goat meat. Now pork is increasingly replacing goat meat. So people are focusing on what's available and what's cheaper and what they like. So there's a lot of dynamism in what people eat. So, but the strategies to produce goat to replace bushmeat, that's been a big effort that European Commission and USAID has tried to do. But people, in fact, rarely consume this goat meat in the villages because they use it for either bride wealth or paying fines. So it's not really a wealth creation or an increase in food security. That's what I've been able to establish. Then the second part, what was the second part of your question?
Even part of how we think they will solve this issue when the policy and decision makers themselves are the first ones to consume bushmeat.
Well, that segues into the question about great apes. And we know that someone that, you know, the rich, powerful man in Brazzaville, if his wife is pregnant, he's going to make sure that she has gorilla meat so the son will be born nice and strong. So yeah, there is consumption of the great apes. Another friend of mine, who grew up in the forest, I said to him, "But do you eat bonobos?" And he responded to me, "Ce sont des macaques, no? They're monkeys, aren't they?" So, in other words, yes, he eats them. So, there was another example a couple of years ago. One of the upscale restaurants in Kinshasa was selling, or put on the menu, baby chimps for the New Year's Day menu. Right? It was a Hotel Beatrice. So yeah, consumption of the great apes is an issue. But the other thing that's an issue is the snares. You know, the snares don't make a distinction between different species. Whereas a hunter may not have shot those animals in the past, but even now, if they see one in the forest, and when the animal is smoked, it's very, very difficult to establish what the species is.
Natasha, are we at time? Have we got time for some more?
Is there any more questions?
Any more questions?
Oh, we can also informally do that over the glass of wine too, you know.
There was the last question.
Oh, there was a last question.
From about the ape.
I responded, no? No.
Oh, you have already. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well,
So stick around, we can talk outside.
I won't do a long
Yes.
closing, but just to say thank you for everybody for coming and for engaging with this. And thanks very much to Theodore for writing the book and presenting for us today. So if we could give you a hand.
Thank you.
And I hope you will buy the book and enjoy it, because it is a really valuable addition to what we can read about the subject.
Thank you for saying so, Jack.
Thanks, everybody.